That's very powerful techniques that I've only learned in NLP and nowhere else. Why sell one at a time when you can sell thousands at a time? Only through NLP was I able to build these models, compulsion being one of those models. If you're trying to sell somebody something that they feel a failure about, trying to convince them that they're going to be successful when their internal state is one of failure, very hard to do, nearly impossible. Instead, what I really have done in sales is I lean into that. How can I show them that they can do it even if they're a failure? So if I'm trying to crack a safe and I have a toolbox, I will use every tool in that toolbox until the safe is cracked. Confusion is one of the most useful selling states I've ever found.
Make sure you're listening up. You're about to get some gold nuggets here, because what he's saying is cutting edge stuff I've never found anywhere else from any other NLP teacher or salesperson. So if you're ready to level up your sales by learning multi-million-dollar sales techniques, you're in the right place. My guest, who I'm about to introduce, is one of the top salespeople in the world. People have asked me, ever since I started teaching NLP, to make more content around sales, persuasion, and influence. And I have to say that NLP has definitely helped me in these areas tremendously. However, there are people who do it much better than me and who teach it much better than I do. My guest, Jason Fladlien, is one of those people. So count yourself lucky for showing up, because Jason is going to unload absolute gold over the next several minutes. Jason is a world-renowned salesperson and marketer. He finds NLP to be the most effective tool for persuasion and influence, and he's going to explain why and how he uses it so effectively. But he does not limit himself to NLP. He uses whatever he finds effective. He has over 100,000 customers over 131 countries. He holds the record for the biggest product launch in his industry, which is $57.9 million. He also holds the record for the biggest affiliate promotion in his industry at $9.8 million in just 8 days. He also consults with Alex Hormozi and Dean Graziosi. He also keynoted the biggest digital marketing conferences in Germany and Brazil. We had Jason about a month ago, and I got a lot of requests for a product, and they were saying, like, when are you coming out with some sort of sales persuasion product with Jason? And I was like, well, we don't have that yet, and we haven't had that in the plan. So, but that got me thinking. And so, if you guys really enjoy this content with Jason, um, we can have him back if he's willing to come back. And if you're interested in such a product that he could deliver, you'll find in the description a link where you can sign up. There's a little survey. It has like just 3 questions. Tell us what you're looking for, and if we have the stuff to make it, or Jason's up for it, maybe we'll make that. Not making any promises yet, but check it out. Answer those questions. If we get enough people who are interested, then we might just do that.
You've heard me say this before, Damon. I don't think there's any good NLP persuasion training on the market.
I agree.
It's fascinating because NLP is a great technology, but it's terribly defined. So when we say, what is NLP? You ask 1,000 people, you'll get 1,000 different definitions, right? But the point of NLP is to be precise and to define things, to create the model of reality, if you will, and be very clear on what it is. So it's ironic in a sense that NLP, which is supposed to be a technology that gives you more clarity and insight, is become very muddy and nobody even understands or can even agree on what NLP is. So I think the first thing that is useful is to try to define the term of what it means to use NLP for persuasion. And I get why NLP is so hard to understand, because really, what is it? It's such a powerful technology that so many things can fit under it. And because so many things can fit under it, everybody gets confused. If it's everything, then it's nothing, kind of a deal.
Mhm.
So is NLP hypnosis? Kind of,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a lot of Ericksonian insights
Mhm.
into there. The power of a Milton Erickson model is Erickson was really good at creating change very fast, profound change created very quickly. And what Bandler and Grinder did is they were able to reverse it. So what Milton could do unconsciously, they created a conscious map to be able to model. And that's the second thing is NLP modeling. Kind of, yeah. I mean, it does do a lot of
Mhm.
modeling, and I find modeling to be particularly useful. Is NLP a therapeutic tool? Mostly, that's how NLP is specifically used in most instances, either directly in therapy or indirectly through like personal development outside of the normal therapeutic models. But at the root of the therapy is change. And at the root of hypnosis is change. And at the root of modeling is to change the model from one that is inefficient to one that is efficient. And then you can get into some of the other techniques of NLP, such as mirroring and all these different meta models, all that kind of stuff, right? And those things can be useful tools in the NLP toolkit, but the tool isn't the thing. The hammer isn't the house. The hammer is a tool that can be used to build the house. And so I think it's really important to start there. And so, Damon, what would you say, like what attracted you to NLP in the first place that made you wanted to become certified, put all this time and effort in, and then become one of the biggest NLP YouTube channels on the planet?
Quite honestly, I had fallen into depression twice, and I was determined not to let that happen again. And I thought I had seen the effectiveness of NLP from one of my professors who, in my first depression, I turned to him, and in one session, depression was gone. I just couldn't believe it. It just didn't seem right. And then the second time I became depressed, which was 10 years later, I went through traditional psychotherapy, and it took me a year to come out of it. And I was living in Santa Cruz by this time, and I knew that there was a training up at UCSC every summer. And I thought, okay, the therapy is not getting me any further where I want to be. And I know I've seen the effectiveness of NLP. And so I want to take NLP to take care of my mental health. I also want to use it to grow my business because my insurance business was doing terrible at the time. And overall, I just wanted to feel better and be more effective in my life. And it did all of those things. I used it in sales and in my insurance agency. My sales went up. It just what eventually happened after doing NLP enough, I discovered what was truly making me unhappy, and that was my insurance agency and my marriage. And I had that, you know, using NLP. What you were pointing at, I think earlier, is you're talking about how all these things can fall under NLP, and the reason for that is NLP is content free and
Yeah,
it's all structure based. And
true.
so when you start looking at what is the structure that makes a person happy, then you start to find you come face to face with the truth. Well, the content that you're swimming in is what is making you very unhappy. And so you need to change structure. You also need to change content. And the same thing with sales, like how I was delivering my sales presentations and everything. It was not structured to fit the person who I was pitching. And so I had to change the structure of how I was pitching the person to match their map of reality. And as
Yeah.
soon as I did that, it was like, oh, well, yeah, like it made perfect sense what I was putting in front of them. And so my sales went up.
Yeah, so NLP is very attractive because when it's done correctly, change happens very quickly and it's very profound change.
Mhm.
It's like mind-blowingly fast. And the paradigm of change is it's something that's supposed to take forever to occur. You go to therapy for 10 years. The only thing that's changing is your bank account gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the therapist gets larger, larger, and larger.
Mhm.
So I am by nature attracted to NLP because NLP, as you said, it's a process basically. It's supposed to be agnostic.
Mhm.
NLP has a philosophy at the heart of it is that we'll use anything that we can to get the job done. Anger is not a negative emotion, nor is it a positive emotion. Anger is an emotion that has usefulness in certain scenarios and it doesn't have usefulness in other scenarios. So I
Mhm.
inherently understood that coming in, and then NLP gave a process and a structure to apply it and experiment. But Damon, here's what I see in the field of NLP that just drives me absolutely insane: is if they teach you how to model, where are all these models being created? You're not seeing them in NLP. You're seeing them regurgitate existing models from the 70s that are frankly outdated when the technology was very new. And so I think the idea is it should create innovation. but we don't see very much innovation in NLP, which is frustrating to me. And what
Yeah.
I was able to do was create innovation with NLP. I said, okay, now that I have the tools, let me build my own models. It essentially gave me the model to create other models, a meta model, if you will, but not the meta model as they called it.
Mhm.
And that's what became very useful in the sales process. But at the heart of it, and I'll run through some of the most useful things, and then you can give me NLP and I'll show you how I use it in sales. Like you can give me the general NLP because you understand NLP way better than I do, from a definitions level, from a structure level. I have more of an intuition about it now that I've used a few of its tools in a sales capacity. But at the heart of it to me was the concept of the model of the reality. So in your reality right now, you look at the world in a certain way and you make decisions based upon that. And if I give you something that doesn't fit in that model of reality, I cannot persuade you. It is impossible. So I either have to enter your model of reality and communicate through that model of reality, or I have to know how to change a model of reality. And
Well,
so I either
before you
have
go any further, I do
yeah,
want to say, and I think you're nailing it. When I saw your presentation years ago at the Traffic and Conversion Summit, and you basically laid out the structure of how to produce an effective webinar. When I saw that structure, I don't think everyone in that room got it. When I saw that structure, I knew what you were doing. And I knew that you had used NLP, even though you said nothing about NLP.
yeah,
And I was convinced right away this will work. And you confirmed for me later what you did, what you do in that structure, which I don't think I ever could have pulled together or created. What you do in that structure is you create a compulsion.
yeah,
And I could not stop thinking about your presentation after that because I already felt you put that structure into the presentation. I felt compelled to learn more because I knew it was absolutely going to work. It was just a matter of like, okay, take this structure that you created, just drop my stuff into it, and I knew I was going to sell. And so I found you the next day and I was like, where do I get this information? And you told me how to find it. The first webinar I did, I went from less than 5% close ratio to a great like a 28% close ratio. And but I knew it because I recognized the structure you were putting into it.
yeah, and we can talk because that's advanced stuff like compulsions, building compulsions. So, by the way, so this goes to utility, which we talked about earlier. Is everything is useful in the right circumstance? So, and I learned this from Bandler. Bandler would say when somebody with OCD came in, he would get very excited. He was like, "These are easy people. I just overload them with things to do, and I lean into the compulsion. I break the compulsion by leaning into it." And so, like creating a compulsion is very useful. So, you model an OCD person and how they build compulsions, and then you get rid of the neuroses that's attached to that, and then you attach the compulsion to the behavior that they want and that you can help them get. Um, so that's very powerful techniques that I've only learned in NLP and nowhere else. There's no sales book that I've ever read, no marketing book that I've ever read. Only through NLP was I able to build these models, compulsion being one of those models. But just in a very basic term of a model of reality is, if you're trying to sell somebody something that they feel a failure about, trying to convince them that they're going to be successful when their internal state is one of failure, very hard to do, nearly
Mhm.
impossible. It can be done, and this is what most people try to do, and it works a little bit, enough so that it persists, but it's very inefficient. So instead, what I really have done in sales is I lean into that. How can I show them that they can do it even if they're a failure versus convincing them to be a success? And so I try not to fight the model of reality. I try to use what's in their model of reality to get the most effective results. So if somebody says they're a failure, I say, great, how can we fail your way to whatever the outcome is? So if they want to make $10,000 a month, I said, you're not ready to be successful yet, because that would mean 50,000. You're not there. You're going to fail. So if we're going to fail anyway, how do we fail our way to 10,000? So we use what is already existing first before we try to add anything new to the model of reality. And so I oftentimes will use the person's biggest excuse, because it has the most energetic force, as the strongest lever to get
Okay.
them to do what they
I
want.
want to say, I hope everyone watching and listening, make sure you're listening up. You're about to get some gold nuggets here because what he's saying is cutting edge stuff I've never found anywhere else from any other NLP teacher or salesperson. So sorry I interrupted you, but I
That's
just want to make
fine.
sure everybody's listening up for this.
Yeah. So, and you will see versions of this elsewhere because what NLP really is a collection of models. So, if they find something that Virginia Satir does and they can build a model, great. That's outside of NLP initially, and it's brought into NLP. So, if you study the best persuaders, they will do this stuff naturally. And then NLP can give you a map so you can replicate it. So, it's not just, oh, he's a natural. No, there's always a process to everything that everybody does. There's always a decision making process that occurs. The programming part of NLP comes from computer programming. Like literally, if we were to build a computer program, this is what it would look like. And at a subatomic level, we make decisions like a computer makes a decision. We're just unaware of most of this. And so, what we're trying to figure out is we're trying to elicit somebody's decision making process, which lives in their model of reality. And so, if somebody says to me, Jason, I don't know if I should buy this, how would you know if you should buy this? We're starting to elicit their decision making process. And then all we got to do is fit our offering within that decision making process. So, how would you know if you made a good purchase decision or not? Is one of my favorite questions that I always ask. It's not like, what would it take to get you to buy, or why do you want to buy this, or why is this important to you? Why and what questions? Not very useful. And I learned that in
So,
NLP.
yeah, a common one that I hear people using in NLP is when someone says, "Well, I can't afford it." And
Yeah.
then the NLP person will go, meta model, what if you could? What do you think about that?
It's okay, right? So if I'm trying to crack a safe and I have a toolbox, I will use every tool in that toolbox until the safe is cracked, right? So I'm not opposed to using that, but I will tell you what I don't like to do is the technique everybody else does, because in persuasion, if the familiarity breeds the contempt,
Mhm.
if they're used to it, they will generalize it. And so, oh, I've
Yes.
heard somebody else say this to me before, so now I will run an automation program based upon hearing this. And again,
Yes.
I've learned all this in NLP. So if I lead with the thing they're used to hearing when other people who have tried to persuade them at have failed at, I am fighting an uphill battle. And so instead, I would like to use other techniques. So what was the question again? And I can show you some of the tools that I would use in that scenario. I can't afford it. Was that it?
Yeah, that's gonna probably be the most common one, but,
Yeah.
so one more thing about that too, when I hear someone say, "I can't afford it," I just hear them saying, "I don't see enough value in this
Yeah.
to put money on it or to take money from something else I'm spending on and put toward it." It's not there's never real I mean, unless you're flat broke and you can't pay your bills, then, okay,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
you're
there could be a variety of reasons why somebody could say, "I can't afford it." It doesn't really matter. Just like, again, in NLP, it doesn't matter why they have it. That's not very useful content. Like, you can
Mhm.
change somebody without knowing anything about why they got the condition they had in the first place, which is revolutionary from an NLP perspective. So the question is, I can't afford it. How do you know you can't afford it? Maybe you can afford it. That's one of my favorite ones. Because all you got to do is create doubt into the belief, and then you can break the belief. If they believe it to be true, you got no leverage. But if you can insert doubt into the belief, then they're open to changing that belief. How do you know you can't afford it? Maybe you actually can afford it. They go, that's always a good sign, by the way. When you get somebody to go, you've broken their automation. And that's good. And that's one of the tools. How do you know? So, how is one of my favorites. You can also say you can't afford it, and then you just leave it at that. So you can challenge the belief directly. And I find that to be very powerful for weaker beliefs, because there's a hierarchy of beliefs. There's some beliefs that we are 100% certain of, and there's some beliefs that we kind of believe them, but we can be very easily swayed. So another way that I can't afford it is, I think you can afford it. And then you just sit there and wait. Or you could say, is it that you can't afford it, or is it something else? So again, we're trying to give them to look at the problem from different perspectives. But at the heart of it is we're always trying to give them a different viewpoint on the problem other than the one they're currently looking it through. Because if
I
they
think
only
that's
look at it through that one viewpoint, they're only going to get one feeling associated with that.
So I think this is a really important point because I think what some people are going to do, they're going to hear what you're saying and they're going to say, "Oh, okay, so I'm going to try out these different
Yep.
things that Jason is telling me to say when somebody brings up this objection." But they're kind of if you only do that, you're really missing the point. So can you repeat what you're saying about what you're looking for, sort of beyond? What are you looking for by asking such a question? You mentioned casting doubt. So
I'm trying to figure out more of their model of reality, how they
yes,
make decisions,
yeah,
right? And so all the questions are doing is trying to understand more the world that they live in, which influences the decisions that they make. Because we should take a quick caveat here. We're only selling stuff to people who, at this point, we've determined that it would be the best decision for them to buy, and it would be bad for them not to buy. So this is where we get to these questions. So if we want to do persuasion at a higher level, we're getting very granular here, like a nose to nose scenario, which I almost do none of. I haven't done one-on-one selling in 10 years. It's woefully inefficient. Why sell one at a time when you can sell thousands at a time? But that's neither here nor there. These micro examples are good because they're like slices of life to see how it's applied at a granular level. But all we're trying to do here is just figure out the model of the reality our audience is in, and then we could determine how they make decisions, and we can take the best part of how they make decisions and use that, and we can see the limitations in their decision-making process and help them unlimit those things. But we're at a point right now where we've determined and we know for a fact that they should buy this thing, because here's the crazy thing about human beings, Damon, is we often don't do the things that we know we should do. And that's tough. We want the change. We're desirous of the change. And we know buying this thing will give us a higher likelihood of getting the change than not buying it. And it makes sense to buy it. And even in that scenario, 9 out of 10 people still will not buy. Mm-hmm. Not for serious stuff. For like, tabloid magazine stuff, bubblegum stuff, yeah, they'll buy that. But for serious changing of who the self is at a fundamental level, people will be most hesitant to buy the things that will be most helpful to them. So it's our job to help them make a decision that's in their best interest, but they're going to be resistant towards it because they're resistant to change. And Bandler said this, and it's really powerful. He says, it's not survival of the fit, it's survival of the familiar. People would rather die than change because change is scary, and they know what their current life is like, even if they hate it. And that comfort of what is stops people from what they can become. And that's what's very tough. That's why sales is so highly paid, and marketing is so highly paid, and persuasion is so highly paid, because you're helping people at the highest level. It's psychology applied in a way that can make you a tremendous amount of money, because you're unlimiting somebody in their decision-making process for something that they want. So when we talk about these things, in the context is, we know it's in their best interest to buy. They know it's in their best interest to buy, but they're working against their own self-interest, and we have to get them around their own limitations. And then if we can, they will achieve a better result. But that starts with getting them to buy the product first.
It sounds like you're coaching them rather than selling them.
You are. And just like therapists, most coaches suck. Like, they will create more trauma than they will solve, because they're terrible at coaching, because they think that coaching is the topic that they're an expert on. And that's 10% of what makes a good coach. 90% of what makes a good coach is helping somebody organize their thoughts and feelings and states, and then utilizing the best parts of those, essentially untying somebody who's in knots. That's what a coach is really good at. And yeah, sales is coaching. It's applied coaching to the scenario of deciding to purchase or not. And so all of these things are tools in the toolkit that helps somebody untangle the limiting parts of themselves that prevent them from making decisions that would help them. And that's what selling at the highest level looks like. And NLP has more technology that I've been able to pull from and use to help me sell and to help me persuade than any other source material that exists out there.
And then you also mastered Zig Ziglar stuff. You also
Yeah.
pulled Cialdini's stuff, which is kind of NLP of you, because you're taking what works and then you're pulling the structure from it and then applying it to what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a thing in business. Here's my belief. If I do everything you do and then I do the things you don't do, I will go farther than you will go. It's a simple belief, but it makes a lot of sense. The challenge with that is, if it takes me 100 hours to learn the things that you do and I don't have any time left over, then I can't learn the things that you don't. And so I have to learn at a hyper efficient level. I have to know how to learn very quickly. And NLP provides the best models, in my opinion, on how to learn quickly. The problem is, David, this blows my mind. This is why I don't hang out with NLPers or take NLP trainings formally, because they're taught independence, but they're bred to be dependent. They get overly dependent on the material of NLP instead of using it to create their own models, as you've heard me say before. And so NLP is supposed to teach you how to learn at a more efficient level. But what happens is people get addicted to learning NLP instead of actually applying it. I mean, Tony
Right.
Robbins is the number one understander of NLP at a persuasive level on the whole entire planet. And what Tony was able to do was immediately learn a concept from NLP and go out and field test it instantaneously, and then adjust it, and then improve it, and then optimize it. And this is why he has models that you won't find in NLP, because he didn't use NLP to mirror it and mimic it. He used it to build his own stuff. So what I would do is I'd look at, hey, okay, um, Milton Erickson seems to have the quickest way of change that exists in a hypnotic state, conversational hypnosis. Bandler and Grindler were able to define, 7, 8, 11, 12. I don't remember how many. It's been a while since I've read like the structure of magic and, hypnotic patterns of Milton Erickson. But they identified like 11 specific things that Erickson would do time and again. So I'd say, okay, cool. I just got to use all of these 11 things in a sales process. And then I start practicing ways to use these 11 things. And then I would be able to speak an Ericksonian style communication. And that's a tool I have in my toolkit when it comes to helping convert somebody. So Erickson would use it in therapeutic scenarios, and I would learn how to use it in cell scenarios. And at the heart of what Erickson did was what they called utility. So a patient would come and see Erickson and say, I can't sit still, so no therapist has been able to help me. And Erickson would say, good, as you pace around the office. And then he now starts to enter their model of reality, right? He uses it. He says, great, I have somebody that's going to be very compliant to me. How am I going to make them compliant? I'm going to take their disorder and make it useful. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking a note. Okay, so every time a client now comes to me with any problem they have, I'm going to say, great, I can use this because the energetic force of the problem is going to give me more leverage than anything else. And that's awesome. So if people say, I can't, it's too expensive, great. I'm glad it's too expensive because now you're going to have to take it very serious. So that's utility. Of course, you could say, how do you know it's too expensive? It might be too cheap. I don't know. I thought it was too cheap when I priced it. I thought I should have made it even more expensive. Maybe I will make it more expensive. They say, say again, you're trying to get them to think like that. So I learned from Erickson, like utility. You learn from Erickson all kinds of stuff. Some of it I couldn't apply and I couldn't find useful, or maybe it was just too hard for me. But other stuff with Erickson is just the language. There's just the languages that he uses. And just learning how to speak that language. So you say, I don't know exactly when you'll start to get what I'm about to talk with you today. So that's a presupposition. I don't know exactly when you'll get it. I use this with audiences as well. Like I just spoke at an event for martial arts owners, martial arts studio owners a week ago in Phoenix. And I said to the audience, I go, there's 4 of you in this room who are going to take this and make millions of dollars with it. I don't know about the rest of you. And I said, of the 4, I know one of you already who you are. The other 3, you'll have to tell me later, right? So this is a frame. And I learned this from NLP. The frame is we're presupposing that 4 people will become millionaires. So 4 people in that room will find a way to become millionaires and attribute it to me. Good. Cool. It's good for the brand, but it's also good for them. But also at the same time, I've created this double bind, if you will, which again, I've learned this from NLP. If people prove me wrong, I'm right. And if people prove me right, I'm right. So if only 3 or 4 people become successful, great. I'm happy with that. But I know there's people in the audience saying, I'm going to prove you wrong, Jason. I'm going to be the 5th successful person. Great. I would rather be rich and wrong than right and poor. So these are frames that I've learned from Erickson, and then I've been able to apply in persuasion. So, nested stories, right? Like when I was a child, my father was used to tell me this story all the time. And the story was about these 2 young men who decided to start a business. And one of those young men who started a business heard about a story, blah, blah. You can't, the referential index or whatever they call it. I'm not strong on the linguistic side of NLP, but you lose the reference of the story. And when you lose the reference of the story, you're placed in a state of confusion. Confusion is one of the most useful selling states I've ever found. And again, this comes from learning it from NLP, from Erickson, and those modelings. The confusion, when the mind is confused, it looks for anything that makes sense that it can grab onto. And so you have so much more leverage. So if you have a really powerful point you're going to make, if you put somebody in a confused state first, and then your point is what brings them out of a state of confusion, that will give them the paradigm that they need. That'll have more powerful leverage to give them that paradigm. And general sales will say never confuse somebody. They're
That's what I
saying,
was gonna say. So
yeah,
the old way of thinking is, well, and there's truth to it. If you're
yeah,
closing out your sales presentation and everyone's confused, they're not gonna buy, right? Would you agree
true.
with that? Yeah. So what you're doing is you're inserting the confusion, which most people don't know how to do. I think it also takes some practice to be able to insert the confusion and then
Yep.
bring them back to clarity, but you're bringing them to the clarity that you want them to see.
Yeah, the handshake interrupt is purely an example of confusion. So you take the technique and then you say, what makes this technique effective? So the handshake interrupt, for those of you who don't know, this is a thing that Bandler invented. Erickson didn't really actually do it. It's story, by the way, which is a very useful persuasive tool. But the idea of when you reach to shake somebody's hand and they grab your hand and they say, as you notice that your hand, blah, 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 they run the script. They put you in this insane state of confusion where you're like, I don't know what to do next because somebody's never grabbed my hand like that. Every time that I go to shake somebody's hand, this thing happens and now it's not happening. So they're in this state of confusion, which is very scary. So they're willing to do anything that they can to get out of that state of confusion. And in the handshake interrupt, which I've never done, by the way, I don't know how to do it, but I understand it at an intellectual level as they
Mhm.
grab the hand in a certain way. So there's a physiological change. They also put it in front of you in a way that whatever they say will be 100% true because your eyes do change focus when you look at something in the way that they put the hand in front of the face. So you're giving them rapport, agreement statements that are irrefutable. So immediately you get instantaneous rapport, and then they're very confused of what to do next. So they're open to suggestions. And so you give them the suggestion. So I said, okay, cool. I don't need to handshake interrupt anybody. I don't need to put anybody in a hypnotic state. That would be actually terrible in a sales environment to do that. But it's like, how can I create a state of confusion about their problem and then give them a suggestion that would be very helpful to solve their problem? And now I don't have the resistance that would normally come with that suggestion if I just gave it outright. So set up the confusion and then pay it off. And if you've been paying attention, I've already used confusion several times as we've talked here today, David, where I say, how do you know it's too much? It might not be too much. It might be too little. Now all of a sudden they're confused. They're like, wait, no salesperson alive has ever told me what you just told me. I'm very confused. Maybe it isn't too much, they start to think, right? And so confusion can be a very useful tool. And this is where I learned in NLP. And goes against everything else I've learned in marketing, where they say a confused mind says no. The reality is a confused mind doesn't say anything. It's too confused to say something. So
Mhm.
let's not mistake freezing with no. A confused mind is just confused and doesn't know what to do. But in the right conditions, it can be open to suggestions. And so this is state management, which is another thing that I've learned better in NLP than in any other training that I've been involved with. This is why, Damon, I use something that most people don't use. I use anger to sell more than any other tool. People think you shouldn't piss people off, and that will hurt your persuasion. Anger is the strongest emotion I've ever found. Hate is stronger than love when it comes to change. People that are in love, they're typically kind of lazy. I don't know if you've noticed this, right? They're too busy in an endorphin high.
Mhm.
The world is right. They don't have to save anybody's life or conquer anything. But
Mhm.
the people that are most upset are the ones that are most wanting to change. And so when I go into sales, like when I start to go into the close, there's a transition to the close. And when I transition to the close, more often than not, I get people upset first. I get them very angry because anger is a very powerful state. And then I close on that. And I mean, if you watch Bandler, he does this all the time. This is why this whole thing about rapport is so overly stated.
Mhm.
If you watch like Bandler do his sessions that are recorded on video, very often he's intentionally out of rapport. He's not in rapport.
Yeah.
Because he's out of rapport, he can do things that most people can never do or get away with. Now, again, these are high level skills, mind
Mhm.
you. You have to have the ability to both be in rapport and out of rapport. And you have to know when to use what. And that's why it goes back to that premise is everything is useful in the right condition and in the right state. And so what we're doing is what is the state as that somebody can be in emotionally that would be most conducive for them buying? And that's what I obsess over.
So let me drill down on that a little bit. So my experience with what you're talking about, that state of anger, that state of hate, these are very uncomfortable feelings. And so we usually look for some kind of relief. And
Yeah,
so for some people, when they get angry, hitting things that, that is a temporary relief, but they're so uncomfortable with this feeling, like they do that to try to get some relief. Of
true.
course, there's a lot of other things you can do, and even Bandler has said that most people don't change until they're absolutely fed up, which usually
Yep.
is a state of anger or a state of hating something. So is that where is this how you're using that state?
Sometimes, yeah, and also because it's different. So I'll give you a scenario. So one of the ways that I like to close on webinars is I'll show like 6 or 7 success stories. Like, look at Tom, he did this, and Shirley, she did this, and
Mhm.
Emmy did this, and Matt did that, and it was so wonderful. Now, your 99% of salespeople would say, and now it's your turn. You can do it as well, right? And that's so predictable. So we don't want to do that, right? So instead, I'll say, like, look at Tom and look at Emmy and look at Matt and look at Shirley. They did it. Does that mean you can do it? Probably not, because you don't have the advantages that they have. And that should upset you, because the difference between them and you is they had resources you don't have access to yet. Let me give you access to those resources. Here's the resources I'm talking about, right? And I've just get the very condensed Cliff Note versions of it here, Damon, but I'm getting them upset at their current situation, so they'll want to change it. I'm getting them upset and jealous of other success stories, not using the success stories only to validate that if they do it, you can do it. I am utilizing specifically these pattern interrupts of NLP, and also utilizing the state of anger and frustration to create the change, more so than the traditional states of, oh, it's all good, you're going to do it, I'm going to cheer you on, we're all going to be happy, this is going to be fantastic, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. It's okay, not bad to use that, but we want to be A plus students, we don't want to be C
Yeah.
minus students, and so
I
this is
also
where
want
A
to
plus.
I want to put a frame on this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about it. But you are not promoting hate and anger here. I think what you're saying basically is you're waking people up to their untapped potential and showing them that, yeah, you absolutely should be frustrated, angry about this because people who are no smarter than you are getting these results. Would you say
Yeah.
that's correct?
That's part of it, yeah. I mean, and again, we're using every available emotion that's going to help that person
Mm.
get the best outcome that's best for them.
Yeah.
And so I will use love, I will use hate, I will use confusion, I will use love, I will use kindness, right? I will use all of that stuff. I will use rapport, I will disrupt rapport. We have to look at this purely from a perspective of, how do we do everything possible to help somebody make a decision that's in their best interest, and also staying authentic to ourselves as well.
Mhm.
So we're not chameleons. I want to be very clear about that. Some people that get into this NLP stuff, they're like so psychopathic. Like, if you
Yeah.
can't truly help your market, if you can't even know who you are as an individual, so you have to keep that authenticity throughout. I mean, these things shouldn't be said, but I need to say them because some idiot on YouTube somewhere will think something, his model of reality will omit certain things that normal human beings accept.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I'm cautious of that too because
I
I
mean,
get all the
that's
comments on
honestly
my
good for
videos.
us, David, because the more they comment and can, on the YouTube videos and interact with them, the better the algorithm pushes us up. So, by the way, this is how the world typically works.
Mhm.
Politicians spend less time on their policies and more time on the weakness of their opponents, and
Mhm.
that's a better election strategy, if you will. So, but in a persuasion, we have a toolkit, and we should use all the tools available in the kit. So we should use metaphorical stories and analogies, and we should use hypnotic language patterns, and we should use rapport as it makes sense. But ultimately, it really comes down to states and how we manage these states. And then I like how you said put a frame around it, because we haven't even talked about frames.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's
I
talk
use
about that because I think
Yeah,
that's probably the most accessible tool, one of the most accessible tools, because it's more about an understanding rather than like practicing language patterns and things like that. I find once somebody turns on that light of like the frame, then wow, you can use it right away.
yeah, that's a great conversation to have. So, like, this is how I understood frames. It really clicked for me. If we took the Mona Lisa and we put duct tape around it, like a literal frame, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't hit the same. So the frame is like everything. What to speak of putting her up in the Louvre and having a million people standing around it trying to see it for 5 seconds, right? Uh, the story behind it, all that lore, right? All of that's part of the frame.
Mhm.
So the frame is we try to, whatever we're going to communicate, put the frame around it that will have the most impact.
I just want to say
So
real quick, you've been reframing the whole time. From
all
the
the time,
very first things that we were talking about, where like somebody says it's too expensive or something like that, you just
reframe.
started setting different frames. You ask questions that force the person to, in order to understand what you said, they have to reframe it.
Yep.
So I just want to bring like for if you want to
That's a
rewatch that
great point.
video,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then there's frames and there's reframes, which are kind of the same, but not the same. So when I'm selling, before I start anything, I want to create the most conducive frame around it. So I do a pitch. I just did it last night, and it's essentially the start of the pitch goes like, let me see. I don't think I have it on this computer, but the start of the pitch goes something like that. I go, I'm going to do something weird that's going to be hard for you to understand, and you're even going to be confused and worried about my sanity. I'm going to admit all the flaws, problems, and challenges with doing webinars. But before you know it, I'll set a buyer's net around you. And if you're a person who wants to enrich yourself and enrich the world, you'll have no other choice but to say yes with what I'm going to offer you at the end of our presentation here together today. So what I've done is like I set the frame as I'm going to admit all the flaws, all the challenges, all the problems, all the issues. I'm going to talk about how this thing is so hard and how so few people can do it and how most people will fail. So I've already framed them up front of all the problems. And most people don't sell that way. They ignore the problems or they minimize the problems or they kind of throw them at the end, right? But then I also, as part of that frame, I said, but you'll have no other choice but to buy by the end of this presentation. And that's the frame. The frame is you're
Mm,
going to buy. I mean, why not? If you're
yeah.
selling something, if the presupposition is by the time I'm done talking today, if you're the right person, you will buy what I offer. I don't know a better damn frame than that. You can be subtler than I am about it if you want to, and sometimes I am. But usually I communicate the situation that says if these conditions are met, you will buy. If they're not met, I don't want you to buy. And then the rest of the conversation is exploring if you meet these conditions or not. What a powerful frame that is. And so I try to encapsulate most of what I sell underneath that frame. You will buy if you're the right person. I don't want you to buy if you're the wrong person. Now, the rest of our talk is determining if you're the right person or not. There's other parts of this frame, Damon, that are really powerful, which is you should do for any frame that you're doing in sales, which is you are controlling the conversation. You are the one that's leading it. And I mean, there are exceptions to that, but in general, you want to be the one that's in control of the conversation. And so by framing it, you have the authority, and the authority will be more persuasive than just about anything. Jordan Peterson can write the most boring book in the world, 12 Rules of Life or whatever it is, terrible hook, very boring milk toast advice that we've heard a million times, and it sells a million copies, not because of what he wrote, it's because who he is as a person.
Mm,
So authority is super persuasive, and you can get authority by controlling the frame more than anything. Now, buyers will try to take the frame over and hijack the frame, so you have to maintain frame. I learned this from pickup artists, as I know you come from that background as well too. Frame control in a dating situation is even more important than in a selling situation. But the frame is you can control the frame. They will fight back on the frame. They will hijack the frame. And so this is why that's important from a selling perspective. But then on the flip side of it, stealing the frame too. And again, I learned this from the pickup artists who learned this from the NLP people. It's like if I'm not single anymore, I'm happily married. But when I was single, like you go out and you meet a girl and you say to her, the first thing you say to her is like, just so you know, you're not going to be able to take me home and sleep with me tonight. I don't have sex on the first date. Right. She's like, there's that confusion state that runs. Right. What do you
that's
mean?
what I was gonna say. Confusion is a really good tool to use to take the frame back
Yeah.
because when you put them in that state of confusion, they lose the frame. And one of the things I was taught very early in persuasion and influence in NLP is the person with the strongest frame will always get what they want.
Yep.
And what that is not about like imposing your will on someone. That has everything to do with your clarity about what you want out of the situation. And so if a potential buyer's coming in If they're more clear about what they want and what they don't want, if they choose not to buy from you and you're less clear about what you want out of the situation, they're going to get their way. So it's having that clarity is really, in my opinion, what sets the frame. But
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
I see some truth in that. Like, it's easy to create these metaphors of buying. There's a winner and a loser, right? And there isn't. I don't look at it as an adversarial relationship, or like even in frame, when we say the word control, you have to be careful with it. It's not like I'm in control in the sense of I'm controlling your behavior and what you
Right.
do. What you have to look at it is if I understand this and and I can lead it, then it is irresponsible for me not to show up as a leader. They
Mhm.
call this posture in some circles, right? And posture is the posture of a leader. And if I let you down as a leader, that's not good for you and that's not good for me. So being able to manage the frame means being able to lead most effectively. And so that's how I look at these situations is if somebody's frame is I'm scared and I won't take a chance and I'm going to die because I will not change who I am and I will continue to get worse and worse and worse, and that's the frame in which they view the world, I have to get them out of that frame. And I have to frame, if my communication doesn't have a strong frame around it from the clarity that I'm communicating it from, if the frame is not defined, then nobody can understand what I'm saying. And
Right.
that's a problem as well. So it affects communication if the frame isn't very clear. The problem is information is it's very fickle. So the same thing can mean a million different things depending upon the context. And so the frame gives the meaning in the specific context. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And so if I don't frame the advice or the information or the communication properly, you're going to draw the wrong conclusion from it than I intended. You're going to draw a conclusion that's not good for you. So I have to manage the frame if I want to help you the most. And that's how I kind of look at these frames. Now, they're going to come in with their frames as well, whether they know it or not. And we have to reframe that.
Mhm.
And the art of reframing, if you do nothing else, do that. Now, you have to be careful when you listen to Bandler when he talks about NLP. So, some of the things that Bandler says, he says them for reasons other than the specific information that he's given you at the time. So when he says, "Oh,
Mhm.
reframe, that's old stuff, don't use that anymore," right? Part of that reason is because he's created other things because NLP couldn't be copyrighted anymore, and he wants to have ownership of the IP, and I don't blame him at all for any of that. But you have to parse what's being said there. Like when he says reframes don't work anymore, it's just an argument over semantics, in my opinion. What you're doing is you're getting somebody to reassess how they look at a situation, and you're giving them a new frame to consider as well, just like a new frame of glasses. If you're farsighted and I give you the wrong prescription of glasses, you still can't see. But if I give you the right frames to see in, then you could see what you couldn't see before. The reality hasn't changed, but the lens in which you view it has changed. And that's the power of frame. I know we're getting a little geeky and a little
Yeah.
off course,
Well,
but
let's ground this because
yeah,
somebody put a comment here and says as an objection when you're trying to close a sale, and they say, "I need to think about it."
yeah.
What are some reframes that you would use in a situation like that?
Yeah, so typically in that situation, I always want to agree with somebody. Sorry, the of course while we're speaking, the lawnmower guys and everybody comes over here, so forgive me if you hear that. Uh, and as you begin to hear that, you're going to notice something. No, I'm kidding. That's a little Erickson stuff for you, but I need to think about it. Great. So my answer to the thing I teach all beginning people that are in persuasion is just agree with everything everybody says. Great. And then reframe what you're agreeing to. So somebody says, "Great, I need to think it over." Then they say, "I need to think it over." Great. What are you going to think over first? Because you know they haven't actually thought it over.
Mm,
90% of things that people will push back on you are not the real reason that they're not
true.
saying yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's too hard for them to admit the real reason. It's too uncomfortable to admit the real reason, or they're not clear themselves on the real reason. So what we just got to do is we got to keep moving forward. Ferocious resolve is what Bandler calls this, right? And this is the attitude that you have, the state you should be in. The ferocious resolve is everything I can use to move a step forward with. That's a great attitude, a great state to be in. And so somebody says, "I need to think it over." Great. What are you going to think over first? And then they'll go, uh, and then what I'll typically do is, can I make suggestions? And then they'll say, yes, you can. And then I can tell them what to think over first. Well, in order to know what to think over first, I have to understand what you truly want. So, what do you truly want? And now you start to get them to focus on the outcomes, not on the problems. So we're
Mhm.
reframing the focus from problem to outcome. Well, I really want this. Okay. What are the three things you're considering right now that can help you get this? We have my program in front of you right now. What are the other two programs you're considering? Now it's presupposition that you're going to use a program to solve it, right?
Mm.
And then they won't know any of the other programs because yours is the only one that's in front of them. So yours is easy to recall because it's right there. And they'll be like, so be like, so really you're only thinking either this or nothing. Now you're comparing this versus nothing, right? And so it's an unfair comparison, but that's fine, right? And so what specifically about this would you need to know to be true for this to be a good decision for you to make? And then, I mean, and this is, you can use this, or there's 100 other versions of this I could give you as well. And you want to calibrate to the individual. So with people that are not analytical, when they say I need to think it over, I might say to them, is it thinking over or feeling over that you need to do? And they're
Nice.
like, I don't know, right? And then
Oh,
you could
that's good.
say something, Damon, like, well, I want you to think about the best time in your life when you've made the best decisions. Was it a thought that helped you make the decision, or was it a feel that helped you make that decision? And the answer is always a feel. It's always true no matter what, right?
Mhm.
So I learned this from Erickson. Erickson knew all this technical doctor stuff because he was an MD too, right? And so he could know certain things that were physiology based, and he could tell you that, and it was like he was reading your mind. But what he was really doing was, and I'm sorry, they're now in the back
I can
here.
hear it a little bit. It's okay.
Yeah,
It's not too bad.
yeah. So this is using the reality as it comes up. So the utility of this is it will frustrate
Utilization.
me that this is occurring right now, and to make up for it, I'm going to even give you more information. I don't know, right? But so, like Erickson would tell people stuff that would blow their mind that was just factual information, but to them it was like mind reading. So, talk about the
Mhm.
ultimate leverage and the ultimate rapport. So, you have to know universal ways in which people make decisions, and so everybody at the end of the day makes a decision based on a feeling, not based upon a thought. But you don't
Yeah.
just tell them that. You put them in a state where when they hear that, they can most readily accept it. So for somebody who's a non-analytic, think versus a feel conversation, and then you can say, okay, what was the feeling that you first noticed that made it a good decision? And they say, well, this. And then you say, do you have that feeling right now as it's related to this? Right. So you put them in the state
Oh,
where they make a good
nice.
decision, and then you put your product in front of them, and
Very
then they
nice.
then they buy. Yep.
So you have a hard stop at the hour, and so do I. I could do this. I could have this discussion with you all day long because you're just dropping one nugget after another, and it really fits with what I know of NLP. But it's broadening what I know of NLP and persuasion and influence. And I got to say, I didn't realize uh, how much you're really coaching people when you're
Yeah.
selling. I mean, I knew you did an element of that. I'm very familiar with your work and your book and your trainings, but as we're talking about it, I'm realizing that you're really coaching the person. And you have mentioned this before that persuasion and influence, even in sales, can be very transformational for the client you're working with. And now I'm starting to see how this is all coming together the way that you're explaining it. So I would love to continue this conversation at another time when we have more time. And if people are asking for you to come back, uh, would you come back and we can discuss
100%.
this some more?
I
Okay,
don't get to
excellent,
talk about this anywhere else, Damon. This is
awesome.
like,
Okay,
I give people light switches, but this is how the electricity is wired, which I really
definitely,
prefer
yeah.
to talk about. Yeah.
And for those of you, who may have missed the beginning of this, I mentioned we did get a lot of people asking for a sales and persuasion training. The last time I spoke to Jason here, and we don't have anything like that made, and it made me curious and started thinking, if you guys want something like that, in the description of this video, you click on that link and you can opt in to be notified. Also, there is some questions because if you are interested in such a thing, we want to know like what exactly are you interested in, and if we want to make something like that based on your interest, then we will. If not, then we'll just keep maybe having these discussions and going further and further with this. But this is a lot of fun. Like I said, I could do this all day, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And yeah, I'd love to have you back.
Yeah, I'd love to be back.
Awesome. All right. Take care, everybody.